Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Also, check out Off the Floor. That's our Discord server. We are currently making changes there to make it even better. We're streamlining things. We're adding new channels, and we're going to start doing some stage shows there. This is going to be exclusive content that in many cases you can't find anywhere else. So $2.99 per month. Get in there now before the season starts. You're going to not want to miss it. What do they call it, Alex? FOMO? I think that's what you said yesterday. That's what the kids say. All right, so that's where we're going with. $2.99 per month. Link is right here in the description. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. That includes Prize Picks. Download the app from the Google Play Store, the Apple App Store, or just go to prizepicks.com. Use the code 5, F-I-V-E. Put down $5 and play it, and you'll get 50. This is a 10-to-1 match, and it is legal in the state of Florida. Our official fantasy sponsor, Prize Picks. Use the code FIVE. And now, today's episode.
Down the Biscayne. Yikes. Five on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars. Wearing bubble frogs. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing. Got it all band. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat we trust. It's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the Five Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and then Five Reasons Sports. We've got Alex Toledo. You can follow him at Tropical Blanket. And our guy, Ben Tovia. You can find him at Ben Tovia NBA and as part of our playback team and other places on the Five Reasons Sports Network. So sometimes we get topics suggested by fans. Sometimes we get topics suggested by other media members. Sometimes we come up with them on our own, occasionally. And sometimes they're actually suggested by people inside the organization. And this was an interesting one, and I'm not going to mention who suggested it, but it made me think a little bit. So we're going to throw this one out here, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of disagreement, okay? Greg and I did a podcast about winning in misery not long ago, and that caught some attention inside the building because the way that we framed it is different than the way that they frame it. Because Pat Riley talked a lot about winning. There's winning and there's misery, right? But the way that the Heat look at misery is different in the sense of misery is getting really close and having a really good opportunity and not cashing it in. Like, for instance, the Allen Houston shot in 1999, where you were the number one seed. And if you win that series, then you're looking at a San Antonio team. There was no Jordan that year. And so you're looking at a San Antonio team on the other side that you could have beaten, or maybe Dragic and Bam getting hurt in the finals in the bubble. And so you had an opportunity. That's misery because you had a chance, but something happened. Whereas the opposite of winning, I mean, is failure, right? Like the misery and failure are not the same things in terms of the way that they perceive them. Failure is we're just not good enough. Right? Like, we're just not good enough. Like, this is like, for instance, like, I mean, last year's team, we never saw it healthy, and they'll point to that. But let's look at the second year of the Jimmy Butler era. Like, that team, I mean, just wasn't good enough. There's no misery to that. They lost in the first round. That season never really completely got off the ground. Or if you look at, I don't know, the 15 and 67 season or other seasons where they just never had a real chance. And so it makes us sort of think of other things in context. And so we're going to pose this question, okay? And I think this will give you an idea of where fans stand on this too. In the Jimmy Butler era, they've had different kinds of seasons, right? The first season was the bubble season. It was a little weird because they were slipping, down the standings. They got off to this great start, especially offensively. They were slipping down the standings. They made a trade. It didn't stop the slipping. And then COVID happened, right? But on last night, before COVID, suspended the league, the Heat blew a 30-point lead against Charlotte and lost at home. Alex and I, Alex, you were not in the building for that one. I was in the building for that one. And so that was a season that was kind of going the wrong way at that point. But then they had the long COVID break. They came back playing better basketball, even though people forget they were 3-5 in the regular bubble games. And they slipped to the 5 seed, but it didn't matter because there was no home court advantage with Indiana. And then they ended up playing Indiana and they won that series. And we know that they went all the way to the finals. Second year, they never really got out of the starting blocks. I've talked about that. But then the third year and the fourth year, And that's what we're going to talk about today in terms of how we frame success. Which season was more satisfying to you, Ben? Because I know you wanted to jump in on this topic. Was it the 21-22 season where Bam gets hurt, Jimmy misses time, Kyle Lowry does a really good job, which people have sort of forgotten about, in terms of steadying the ship, playing with a bunch of undrafted guys, and they end up getting a number 1 seed. So it was an entertaining season. It was a satisfying season in terms of the regular season. And then they get to the conference final and they lose in game 7 at home to the Boston Celtics because Jimmy Butler took a 3 that didn't go. Was that season more or less satisfying to you in totality than the next season, which was a real struggle? Okay. Like, it was not fun. They end up in the 7 seed, lose their first play-in game, have to sort of be rescued by Max Strus against Chicago simply to get to the postseason, lose Tyler Hero in the process, end up going all the way to the finals with Jimmy Butler scoring 56 against Milwaukee and all those other games before they get beat by Denver. To you, what's the more satisfying season? 2022, great regular season, just miss in the playoffs, getting to the finals, or a struggling regular season, and then you end up getting to the finals but losing?
So, and I do want to say I did ask to jump on this one, and thank you for having me on. In totality, and I think part of this comes from the fact that down here, Pat Riley has kind of bred this mentality in the fan base of winning versus misery. I am going to feel better about more playoff success than regular season success.
Mm-hmm.
So for me personally, 2023 as a whole was more satisfying and more enjoyable just because of that extra playoff success. And, zooming out like from a neutral perspective, it's a difference of 2 wins. 1 extra conference finals win and 1 win in the NBA finals. But man, that feeling of watching Jimmy go nuclear against Milwaukee, Bam, I know our guy Brian Fonseca has talked about this, his best total playoff series against the Knicks that he's ever had in his career. 3-0 up on Boston in the conference finals and then winning in 7 in Boston. And then I don't know if I've ever felt like since the big 3 the way I felt on playback after game 2 when they pulled that off in Denver. And I would argue, and I'll hand it back to you here, but I want to get back to this. That regular season, I think, is a little bit underrated for a few reasons, but I will hand it back to you first.
Okay, now I'm curious, why do you say that? Before I go to Alex, why do you say that regular season was underrated?
I think, first of all, it was like the first real Bam leap that we had gotten since, I would say, his first time as a starter. It was his first season scoring 20 points a game, his second All-Star appearance. He had a stretch from December through to January where he was averaging like 23 a night, had some great games against Boston, had like 3 straight 30-point games against the 2 LA teams in Utah, I want to say. And then post All-Star break, seeing Jimmy Butler, like, what did he average? 27 a night on 6 shooting, just some ridiculous stuff. It was like a real, like, this is what Jimmy would look like if he put his playoff output into a regular season for a period of time. It was a real eye-opener in that regard. And then those clutch games, I think we've made a lot of jokes about them over time, but that's fun basketball, man. Getting to like watch, like, again, making that neutral party kind of argument there, like as a neutral party, getting to watch close clutch basketball every night, that's theater. That's theatrics. It's really fun.
I think that the majority of fans would probably agree as they look back on everything. But I want to go to Alex on this because Alex, you have had to suffer through a lot of podcasts
And
over
games.
the past 2 regular seasons. And I mean, there's been a lot of unsatisfying regular season results. The difference of the 2 years was they had an opportunity to make a run 2 years ago, and they did. And then when Jimmy went out, they had no opportunity to make any kind of a run, particularly starting with Boston this time around. And so they didn't. And they did kind of what 8 seeds do, which is whether you have your star or not, you lose feebly in 5 games to the best team in the league. So I'm just curious for you as having to sit through it, because I'm even thinking back to the 22 playoffs, and I want to look back at this because I can't even really remember. It's funny when you get to the finals, you remember the whole journey of how you got there, but I don't really even remember the 22 playoffs that much. Was
Oof.
that first round was what, Atlanta? Is that
Mhm.
right? Okay, and they smothered Trae Young.
Mhm.
Then the second round was against Philadelphia, and Embiid was hurt. There was a lot of dissension on the Sixers, right? Um, but I don't remember a lot of specifics of that series. I covered every game at home, and I was at 2 of the ones on the road. And then the Celtics series, I mean, what I remember is Jimmy's shot, but it's so hard to separate, one Celtics series from another Celtics series at this point, particularly um, I mean, you have obviously the band block of Tatum in one series, and then you have
Mhm.
Caleb Martin in another series. Ben mentions here in the comments Depot game 5. I don't like it. I need your recall on that. I'll say that because and then and obviously Depot got hurt the next year, and that was unfortunate in the playoffs. But I would have a hard time going through it, and maybe it is the block when you don't have a team go to the finals, because with the big 3, I can still remember who they beat in all of those series, and I can kind of remember moments from all those series, or has them going 8 of 9 in 2 games against Indiana, or Wade getting his knee fixed and then going crazy in the second half of Game 4 of Indiana 2012, or any of the other things that happened. Bosch coming back in the Boston series, and that one. I mean, I can even remember, Baron Davis blowing out his knee, Iman Shumpert blowing out his knee, right, in that series against Miami with the Knicks. I have a hard time remembering a lot of 2022 because I guess they didn't go to the finals. But for you, having had to sit through a difficult regular season, is it worth it? Is it all worth it when you make the finals?
It's great that you mentioned that. You mentioned that point, right? Because that was going to be part of what I was going to say, is that and I love what Ben was talking about, because even with all of that, right? I still think when you look at the 2023 playoff run, and also I think it's hard to not pick it, right? Because when you look at that playoff run and the way it played out, as Ben, did a great job there kind of describing everything, like it's hard to not pick it, man, because the way it played out was just so it was so storybook, right? Like it was, especially when you look at the season before and the way it ended, right? Where, you had the 1 seed, this was supposed to be your year. And then like you had a tumultuous playoff run where you don't have Tyler Hero, and then you miss Jimmy for a game in the conference finals, and he has to come back from that. And it feels like, you're constantly on edge because you could never win at home versus Boston. They finally, they did it in 2023. They came back from that and came out as a playing team, beat the Bucks when nobody expected it, even with or without Giannis. Then to do what they did against Boston, of course the Knicks series was impressive too, but like to pull it out against Boston in Game 7 after going up 3-0 and then losing 3 straight games, like just the way that it played out, it's hard not to pick it. Because you know what, like, yeah, I would much rather cover a number 1 seed regular season and do podcasts every day for that team, for sure, right? But when you're talking about the difference between losing to the Boston Celtics to get to the finals and not, I just think the difference is not big enough, right, in that regular season, especially like how Ben pointed out, the clutch games. I love clutch games. It didn't always go their favor, but they were a good clutch team that season that they made it to the finals. So yeah, like the regular season wasn't awesome. It wasn't dominant, but there was a lot of fun moments, as Ben pointed out. Like, I just think the difference in those two regular seasons is not large enough to overcome, in my opinion, the difference between, losing to the Celtics to get to the finals and not. And that's what it comes down to. And that's just looking at the results, right? Because I was trying to separate, because to me, the results with that plus what you had to go through to get there, I think both of those things is kind of what sways it for me.
Well, the 21-22 team won 53 games. The 22-23 team won 44 games. So actually, it's a pretty significant swing, especially because, it's a 9-game drop, especially when the Heat were actually healthier in that season. The second season, it was not the second season of the Jimmy era, but the second season we're discussing here, the 22-23 season, than they were in the 21-22 season. Because remember, Bam missed all that time in 21-22, which, if you're talking about the most important players were healthier overall in 22-23, again, until Tyler got hurt, for the playoffs. And so as I look at it, I'm like, okay, I understand what you're saying, that like the difference is smaller, but actually the difference in wins is greater than the difference in having gone to the finals or not, which was basically one Jimmy shot, and just in terms of what actually happened. Now, the meaning of it, I'm with you, okay, but they were this close in 21-22. This close. I still have no problem with the shot that he took, by the way. I think you go for the kill, and I hate a lot of his late game shots, but I was fine with that one. You go for the kill in that situation. I know we debated it on the show and all that, but I do think that this is an interesting debate, because I think it plays into what the franchise is trying to accomplish in regular seasons now. And some of it is in their control and some of it's not. They may decide to go all out in this regular season. Okay. They may decide to go all out and still not be good enough to get out of the play-in. Like, they may have their guys healthier than they were last year. They might have Jimmy motivated. They might have a pop from Jaquez and Jovic, and they still might not be better than, obviously Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and then you start to get to Milwaukee, Orlando, Indiana, Cleveland, right? They still might settle behind all those teams. So it's not totally in their control. It's not as simple as saying, like when we used to say during the Big Three era, do they want the 1 seed or not, right? We would talk about that. Like, are they going for it or not? Because we knew if they really tried to go for it, they'd probably get it. But then there was that 1 year Chicago got it. 1 year Indiana got it. And it didn't matter because the Heat went to the finals anyway. And even during Shaquille's time, like, they were not a 1 seed the year they went to the finals and won the championship. They were a 1 seed the year before, but then Shaq was acting like he didn't care about it his second season in Miami. And ultimately he proved right, because they ended up winning the championship. So I guess after the break, what I want to go to here with you, Ben, is this. Do you think that a franchise owes it to its fan base to provide entertainment in the 82? Or is it just about being right for this up to 16 in the playoffs? Before we do that, I want to mention a great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, Better Edge. Use the code 5RSN. That's code 5RSN. You get $20 to play. That's on anything. And they've got marketplaces like, we recorded this around the time that the Thursday night game was starting between the Jets and the Patriots. They had like 25 different line possibilities in there. And that's the difference between this and other sports books. You can find the line that you want. They'll have the odds on there with it. And there's no VIG, which means you're not giving away money for free to the house for doing nothing. This is legal in the state of Florida and many other states. And additionally, we run our contest there as well. We give away t-shirts and more. So check it out. It's betteredge.com. Again, it's betteredge.com. Use the code 5RSN. So let me ask you, Ben, because do the franchises owe, and it's not just the Heat, but to their fan base to make the previous 6 months entertaining?
To an extent, yeah. From a business perspective, yes, because you got to fill the arena somehow, right? And obviously to the extent of you got to get to that postseason. But if playoff success is how you're measured in this league, And if you're consistently playoff successful, then I think you can make the argument to your fan base, well, look what we've done.
Mm-hmm.
Just be patient with us. And when we get to the important time, well, it's like what Shaq used to say about his free throws. We'll be there when it counts.
Is that right in your view, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm pretty much there. Like, I think, that's what this is all about. It's what the players talk about. It's what the coaches talk about. It's like Ben mentioned, it's how you're measured, right? It's how players' legacies are measured, and what everybody has, debates about. It's winning when it matters most and how you perform when you're there. So to me, it's just, whatever. If that's, if that's a stable blueprint to getting you far, then yeah. But that doesn't mean that it can always be thrown out, right? Like,
right.
I get how, like, last season, what happened there wasn't really their fault in the sense of, like, Jimmy getting hurt in the playing game, coming down on Kelly Oubre's foot. That was kind of a freak thing. So I understand them being like, the result doesn't really, confirm or negate the process, which was kind of take it easy because we didn't really get to see it. Right. I get that. But I also get fans being frustrated and being like, no, we don't want to just wait and see. Like, Jimmy's 35 now and all that. So I think it's, in theory, yeah, like, it's cool that they get far in the playoffs when their best player is healthy. But now it's gotten to a different stage where it's like fans are concerned whether he can still give you that output. Because ever since, like, Josh Hart swept the leg, his playoff production went down, and he had a decline. He had a down season. I'm not saying, I think for sure it's going to keep going in that trend, right? Like, he could have a better season for sure. But if it does continue in that trend, then yeah, like, it absolutely confirms what fans have been worried about. So I do think, like, yeah, it's great in theory, but yeah, they're in a different space now. And again, just looking back on what we've gone through here, that playoff run was magical, even with all this and having to cover so many, like, the disappointing past couple of regular seasons. Those results, I think, just weigh so heavily, and the way that they got there too, it was awesome. So it's cool that, through this summer that we've been just kind of trying to get through, that we were able to go down memory lane a little bit and be like, oh yeah, remember those times? That was awesome.
But you mentioned the blueprint, and that's the whole thing. Like, there is no bluept to be a play-in team to get to the finals. Like, that ain't a blueprint. Like, that's right. That's basically making the absolute best of what was a bad situation, and so there has to be some kind. And I think that, again, is what Riley was getting at in the end of year presser, that okay, they're driving for the 1 seed, that this team's not equipped to do that. They're not talented enough to do that. And they haven't really been talented enough to do that through most of the Jimmy era. Honestly, the year they got the 1 seed, it's they did it with 53 wins. Like, that's not anything to sneeze at, but it's not, they didn't win 65. 53 wins typically will not get you a 1 seed. In fact, when I mentioned the Shaq team in 05-06, the Shaq Dwayne team, that team I think won 52. And they had to rally to do that. And I think they ended up the 2 seed that year. Typically, 53 is not going to get a 1 seed, but they did it. And there's a tremendous coaching job. And really, looking back at it, and we could say this about a lot of years, Spo probably should have been coach of the year. If you look at winning 53 games and getting a 1 seed when you had Bam missing several weeks and Jimmy missing a lot of time also. And some of the other players who were inexperienced.
That's pretty insane when you see, like, what's taken place the past couple of seasons. Now with hindsight, like, that does. I think
it's a remarkable regular season. It really is, and that's why I think this is at least a consideration. I think the majority of fans are going to look at this and say, "Well, of course, right? Of course, Ben. Like, the finals, you got to the finals. That's the thing. You didn't get to the finals the previous year, but the reality is, I'll go to you on this, Ben. If they had made it to the finals in 2022, they had a better chance to win the championship than they would have in 2023. Because the team they played on the other side was not as good as the one that they played in 2023. I mean, right? I mean, during the Jimmy era, that Denver team is probably, that particular Denver team was probably the best of any of the teams that have come out of the West.
It's that one, or it's the Lakers team that they faced. Like, those are the two best teams in this 5-year span that have come out of the West, in my opinion. But yes, I think on paper they would have had a better chance against the Warriors. Steph is obviously an all-time great, but I think that team had real defensive matchups for Jimmy to exploit, and he was at his mismatch hunting best in 2022. That is, as a totality, his best playoff run, in my opinion, his most consistent, because he didn't suffer an injury until Game 3 against Boston, when Peyton Pritchard yanked the knee there. But can I kind of throw a question back at you guys, because this is something I'm kind of thinking about as we've gone through this conversation. How much do expectations matter in terms of satisfaction at after a season? Because you mentioned, Ethan, you can't really remember a lot of that individual games from that playoff run in 22. For me, that's the regular season from that year. But I do remember before that season started, the conversations were, oh my goodness, Miami won the offseason. Kyle Lowry, PJ Tucker, Markieff Morris, this is a championship contender. If they don't make the finals, this is a failure of a season. Like, I remember these being legitimate conversations around that team. The 23 team, not so much. It was, how can they compete without making any significant moves? It wasn't, this team is a legitimate finals contender. It's, we don't really know what this team can be. And I think some of that surprise, especially after, losing a play-in game, being the 8th seed, really helped color it differently after the fact. But what do you guys think about that? Like, how do expectations affect your view of things?
No, I think it affects it a lot. And you mentioned, I mean, really the key difference between those two teams was PJ Tucker, I guess, because you brought in PJ, and I remember, it's funny, before that season, I'm with you that the expectations were high, but I know the way that we framed that team, or at least I did, which was, this team is built better for the playoffs than the regular season. Like Lowry and PJ in particular, like, these are, just get them to the playoffs. Like, these are guys who know how to win the playoffs. They have, championship level experience in the postseason. And it actually played out a little differently than that, where they had this really good regular season, even with the injuries. And those two guys, by the way, were critical in those 53 wins. I mean, whatever the criticisms were of Lowry, or the frustrations that PJ left for a rival situation, that those two guys contributed greatly in the regular season. That team was better in the regular season, I think, than people thought. So I actually don't think that they didn't miss expectations that year until Jimmy's shot didn't go. Because you had a game 7 at home, right? You had a game 7 at home. So the expectation level is, you're going to get there. And I also don't think at that point that there was this, we can argue whether there's fear of Boston or not now, but there's certainly more of it now than there was then. I mean, at that point, that team was not nearly as deep. I mean, you didn't have Derek White, and playing this kind of role, and you didn't have Porzingis, right? I mean, it was basically Marcus Smart logging those minutes. Like, that was not quite the same team that we're talking about now.
They were 500 going into the new year. They had a huge second half turnaround to get to the 2 seed.
Right. So I think that the feeling was, the expectation level flipped once you got to the playoffs as the 1 seed. I don't necessarily think before that season it was, okay, this team's going to run through the East. But I do think the expectation levels play into it. I mean, certainly during the Big 3 era they did. I've characterized the Big 3 time as, those championships to me were relief more than they were joy. I mean, it was just, okay, everybody's off our backs now. Like, that's how it felt to me for those teams. Like, everybody's off their backs. 2006 was different, because that was like a coronation of Dwayne. It was just like, oh my God, who is this guy on his rookie contract doing this? Like, nobody does this. Those teams, though, in the Big 3 era, like, it was just, okay, you said you're going to win not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5. You better get a couple here. And that's how that one felt to me. A Jimmy championship would be totally different, would have been totally different, because there was no expectation of Jimmy Butler leading the Heat to a championship when he signed. None. Zilch. I mean, anybody who tells you differently, when Pat said that Jimmy was a top 10 player, when he said that at the introductory press conference, people laughed at that. At best, he's top 15. Okay, that was sort of the framing of that. So everything in the Jimmy era has exceeded expectations. But I'm with you, Ben, that in that particular time going into that postseason in 2022, when you are the 1 seed and you're playing a Boston team you're not really afraid of at home, you got to find a way to finish it. And if they don't call back Max Strus's 3, then maybe they do. And a lot of things obviously played into that. But I think that this is kind of, and Alex, I'll let you close on this. I think this is, to me, I will go with where most fans will go, which was to say, look, you made it to the finals. It's more significant. I think the bubble run was just as much fun. Okay. Because I thought the brand of basketball was great. It was just pure basketball. And it was a tremendous run by them. And if Dragic and Bam don't get hurt, we may have a totally different conversation here. So I will lean towards it being more significant with the playoffs. But I will say this. You do not want to be an organization where the regular season is a slog all the time. You just don't. It's not, because it's an entertainment product, ultimately, Alex. And that's what it is. And this has not been a good entertainment product for the most part between mid-October and mid-April over the past 2 years. It just hasn't been.
I'm with you 100%. Not only is it, like you need to field good entertainment because it's an entertainment product, but it's like Ben mentioned earlier in the show, like usually those types of teams are not the ones who make it far, right? Like you did it. Yeah, you did it. And that was amazing, right? And you also did it as a 5 seed, which is also unlikely in the bubble finals run. But that doesn't make it a sustainable plan. Now, you can be like, okay, we know that we can expect, or at least we think that we can expect, better performances from Jimmy in the playoffs, right? Because that's his track record. But I do think it's not sustainable to expect to make it out of the play-in, and not just make it out, but make it far, right? So I'm with you there. Like, I think it's not great for business. Like Ben mentioned, it's not great for your chances because you're going to have the toughest possible path, most likely having to face at least 2 of the 3 top seeds, most likely on your way to the finals, and having to face one of them right from the onset. So I just think it's not, I'm absolutely not backing up that type of regular season that we've had to go through the past couple of seasons. However, it is all about what you do at the end. And look, it's been cool to talk about this because now you threw in the bubble finals, right? It's like just comparing those 3, great points of Heat basketball to each other is cool to think about. Because it's like, those were the better times. And it's like, yeah, like I think the 22 playoff run was probably the least fun of, if you're comparing it to the bubbles final run. And if you're comparing it to 2023, they were all great. They were all great for different reasons, perhaps 5 of them. And it's great that we can talk about them now. And hopefully, look, Ben's point about expectation, hopefully they can catch some of that lightning again, in the sense of like nobody has high expectations from this season. As we've talked about in other shows, there is some depth here. If they can put it all together and figure out rotations and which, if these young guys can pop, like I think there's something there where like it can. I think the low expectations can help them because they can just have like a 6 seed type of team, a 5 or 6, and fans be like, "Wow, great season!" Right? Because everybody expected to be in the play-in again.
But that's 2003, 2004. I mean, that's 2003, 2004. That team was a 4 seed barely with 42 wins. I mean, typically 42 wins is a 7 seed, even in the East, right?
Well, but no expectations to win. And this Jimmy team is
they started 0-7.
If you go out in the first round again, it all was for nothing.
It was, but here's the thing about that particular team. Although it gets overdone that was such a young team. It had young players on it, but it was also anchored by Brian Grant and Eddie Jones. So you had Lamar, you had Dwayne, you had Karan, and you had UD, who were kind of your young core. Here's the thing, and this is what is working in the Heat's favor this year. If they can, find a way to get some of these pieces to fit together. Young teams captivate fan bases more than veteran teams. Young teams with fresh players are more fun to cover. They're more fun to watch because it's about possibility. If you look at Hero, he's a perfect example of this because there's the arc that's happened with him. Everything was fun the first year with him. Everything was fun, exceeding expectations. From being the 13th pick in the draft No more talk about short arms or any of that kind of stuff. He's making these crazy shots against Philadelphia at the end. He's doing the sneer against Boston, all the things that he did, right, during that period of time, even though he did not have a great finals. Nobody remembered it. And yet he's a better player than he was then. But the fan base has completely flipped on him because he's not new. He's not new. Like, we've seen all this before. We kind of know what Tyler is. Okay, there's incremental improvements, but he's not healthy enough. And
he's on the second contract.
And he's on the second contract. He's making more money, so he's taking up more of the whatever. And they, of course, they gave him the not their fault, but they gave him the unlikely to be earned incentives, and those are counting against the second apron, and all of these peripheral issues with him now because he's not new. Like right now, Hawkins is new, Jovic is new, Ware is new, Larson is new. Like everything that they do, fans are going to look for the positive. And then in 2 years after Jaime gets his extension and he has a couple of clunker games, everybody's going to be all over Jaime. This is just how this works. It's just how it works. But because they've got young players in the roster who are interesting this year with higher upside, they do have a chance, I think, to make this a more entertaining regular season than we've seen in recent years. If you're going to look, if you're going to be 45 and 37, be 45 and 37 with some guys who are going to keep getting better game after game, not guys who have maxed out to where they are and they're looking to go play golf somewhere. Anyway, interesting debate. I think we all kind of came down on the same side of it, but I do think it leaves enough room for people to go the other direction. We appreciate Ben joining us today. Also, thanks to Alex. I'll be back with Greg over the weekend. Again, check out the sponsors. Prize Picks. Use the code 5 Better Edge. Use the code 5 RSN.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.